Today we're diving into the wild world of Saturday Night Live's most notorious musical rebels, bands or artists who got themselves permanently kicked off one of TV's biggest stages. From one artist's legendary protest against corporate control to another band's $20,000 worth of punk rock destruction. In today's video, let's talk about the artists and musical acts who have been banned from Saturday Night Live. Formed in 1977 by Lee Ving, Fear was influential in shaping California's punk scene. The band were famously featured in the 1981 documentary Decline of the Western Civilization. This appearance in the film helped raise the band's profile, and it also caught the attention of former Saturday Night Live member John Belushi, who is now making movies. He was working on an upcoming film called Neighbors, and he befriended the members of Fear, and he wanted them to actually contribute to the film's soundtrack, but things didn't work out. But Belushi was still well connected at Saturday Night Live, and he managed to get the band as a musical guest on the Halloween episode that aired in 1981. The producers were weary of having the band bring their own fans, which included slam dancers, but the band was able to keep them since Belushi offered to appear on that episode. During Fear's set, fans can be seen stage diving, slam dancing, and creating a mosh pit, shocking the show's producers as well as the viewers at home. In the crowd was also Belushi and Minor Threat's Ian MacKaye. The members of Fear told the crowd, "It's nice to be here in New Jersey," which was met by boos from the crowd.
It's great to be here in New Jersey.
It's really good to have a bunch of...
One member of the audience yelled into the microphone, "New York sucks." Things didn't end just there. The New York Post reported that Fear caused upwards of $20,000 worth of damage, destroying a camera and the green room. Those who attended the show's taping referred to the musical performance as a total out-of-control free-for-all. The Post described the performance as part of, and I quote, "a new punk craze that involves dancing, biting, and kicking." Fear were soon banned for life. It was following Fear's performance on SNL, some clubs chose not to hire the band. 80s alternative rock pioneers The Replacements were a last-minute addition to play Saturday Night Live in 1986. They released their major label debut 1 year prior with Tim and were now represented by a major management firm. But behind the scenes, the band was splitting at the seams. Guitarist Bob Stinson was suffering from mental health issues and sliding deeper into substance abuse. The Replacements were booked at the last minute, having to step in for the Pointer Sisters, who only canceled a few days prior. It just so happened that the musical director for the show, G.E. Smith, was a huge fan of the Replacements and booked them to perform. The band's rehearsals seemed to go well, according to Smith, but when showtime came, things quickly fell apart. With nowhere to go between rehearsals and the live taping, the band was trapped on the show's 18th floor set. One of the group's soundmen smuggled alcohol, and they also had cocaine on them as well. That night's host, Harry Dean, also partook in the activities, horrifying the show's producers. When the show went live, the band kicked off their performance with Bastards of Young, but to the producers' surprise, the members had turned up their amps after rehearsals, with the producers in the audience at home recoiling at the volume. Bassist Tommy Stinson was sometimes out of frame. Bob was donning a feminine outfit, while frontman Paul Westerberg walked away from the mic mid-verse. During that performance, Westerberg could be heard shouting at Bob, "Come on," with Westerberg later recalling, "We just pretended we weren't on camera." The obscenity had made it past the censors, and Lorne Michaels had taken note of it and chewed out the band's party in the green room, which the band also redecorated. The Replacements went out and performed their next tune, "Kiss Me on the Bus," which saw the members have to start the song twice after a screw-up. Also noticeable was that the members minus Bob had exchanged clothes with each other, much to Bob's surprise. Bob later recalled, "I was in the bathroom getting high. I had no idea those three had switched clothes. I didn't even know until I saw the playback." Following the show, Bob went back to his hotel. He got in an angry rage and destroyed his hotel room, with Lorne Michaels receiving a bill for $1,100 in damages. It resulted in Saturday Night Live banning the Replacements, and at one point, the show even considered banning any act who was on their label Warner Brothers. Sinéad O'Connor appeared on SNL twice during her career. She was initially set to appear on May 12, 1990, but dropped out to protest comedian Andrew Dice Clay, who was hosting that night. She would make her first appearance on September 29th of the same year, but it was her second appearance on October 3rd, 1992 that created a media and public firestorm. During her appearance on the show, she was scheduled to perform 2 songs that night. The second song was an a cappella cover of Bob Marley's War. The song was written about racism, but during her live performance, O'Connor would change the song so it was directed against the Catholic Church's child abuse scandals in Europe. It was during the dress rehearsal she held up a photo of a starving child. But during the live show, the photo of the starving child was replaced with Pope John Paul II, and she changed one of the lyrics from racism to child abuse. Towards the end of her performance, she would take the photo of the Pope, rip it to shreds, throwing it at the camera, telling the audience, "Fight the real enemy." O'Connor drew on her own experiences of abuse at the hands of the church when she was a child, recalling, "I went to school every day, covered in bruises, boils, styes, and face welts, you name it. Nobody ever said a bloody word or did a thing." The producers of the show turned off the applause sign, and after O'Connor's action, the studio fell silent. The blowback against NBC was almost instantaneous. They received upwards of 4,400 calls, mostly complaining about the musician's actions that night. The inspiration for the stunt, though, came from an unusual place. O'Connor later revealed it was Bob Geldof who inspired her to commit the stunt, recalling to the hot press, "When the Boomtown Rats went to #1 in England with Rat Trap, Bob Geldof went on top of the pops and ripped up a photo of John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, who had been #1 for weeks and weeks before. And I thought, yeah, what if somebody ripped up a picture of the Pope? Half of me was just like, Jesus, I'd love to see what would happen." Musicians were split over her actions. Bob Dylan praised her for what she did, and believe it or not, Madonna, of all people, criticized her, with the pop star telling the New York Times, "I think there is a better way to present her ideas rather than ripping up an image that means a lot to other people. If she's against the Roman Catholic Church and she's a problem with them, I think she should talk about it." The following week's show issued an apology through actor and host Joe Pesci, who told the audience, "Sinead O'Connor tore up a picture of the Pope and I thought it was wrong." The actor then held up a patched up photo to the audience's applause. Pesci added, "If that had been my show, I would have gave her such a smack," adding, "Pope John Paul II forgave the man who shot him. I'm sure he's not bothered by this. If she defaced any images of Italian popes, watch out." How did O'Connor feel about her actions looking back? Well, she still defended him, telling Carson Daly, 10 years after the Pope ripping episode, "You all then found out in America what was going on. We always say Americans, they think nothing happened until they found out about it." The Christmas episode of Saturday Night Live in 1977 was supposed to have Sex Pistols appearing as a musical guest. The problem, though, was that their manager, Malcolm McLaren, had allegedly screwed up their visa paperwork. Next in line to fill in for the Sex Pistols were the Ramones, but according to Joey Ramone's autobiography, he would write, "We don't substitute for anybody." So the producer's third choice for musical guest was Elvis Costello, who was promoting his first album, My Aim Is True, which had just come out in America. In a nod to Sex Pistols being a no-show, you can see Elvis Costello's drummer, Pete Thomas, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Thanks, Malk." Hosting the show that evening was a person named Miskell Spillman. Don't recognize the name? Well, you're not alone. Spillman had won a contest that the show was running called Anyone Can Host. I honestly think they should just bring it back. Costello's musical career began in the early part of the 70s playing English pubs, and he was largely lumped in with the punk and new wave movement at the time. Costello's label in the States, Columbia, and SNL's producers agreed that the musician was going to perform Less Than Zero, his first single from the album. But Costello disagreed with the decision. The track was written about a disgraced British political figure named Oswald Mosley, who had a checkered past dealing with racism. To Costello, no one in America would likely have known about the song's meaning or backstory, especially given that this was the pre-internet days. Costello told Zane Lowe years later, "We did end up on Saturday Night Live, and I just wanted them to remember us. I didn't really have anything against the show. I was more pissed off at being told what to play by the record company than I was NBC, truthfully. I can't remember whether I said what I was going to do, but I think I just said, watch me." While Costello and his band The Attractions began performing Less Than Zero, he stopped the performance early on and started playing the more appropriate radio. The song criticized the commercialization of the radio and television airwaves, which NBC was very much a part of.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to do this song here. Radio. 1, 2.
The crowd didn't seem to mind the change in plans, responding favorably to it, and following the performance, Costello saw a boost in record sales, and his popularity in America grew. It was said that show producer Lorne Michaels was furious at the change in plans, reportedly raising his middle finger at the TV screen while Costello was performing. The stunt resulted in the musician being banned from the show for nearly a decade. The musician told Zane Lowe where the inspiration came from, stating, "They've run that clip forever, and every time anybody does anything outrageous on that show, I get name-checked. But I was copying Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix had done the same thing on the Lulu show when he went into an unscheduled number. I remember seeing it and going, what the hell's going on?" Costello did make a return to SNL in 1989 when the ban was lifted, and again in 2000 for the show's 25th anniversary special, where he performed alongside the Beastie Boys. Beastie Boys launched into their hit song Sabotage, only to have Costello rush the stage and interrupt the performance with the band, and Costello and Beastie Boys then started doing Radio. In 1997, David Bowie was scheduled as a musical guest for SNL. Bowie expressed his desire during the week he was on to be involved in a sketch. The writers had written a sketch for Bowie, with the musician recalling, "The gist was that I was somehow roped into a low-budget telly advertisement for a Brooklyn bakery. They wanted me to sing about their pastries or what have you. One of the things they came up with was a version of my song Watch That Man. But instead, in the chorus, I would sing Try or Flan." Bowie wasn't happy with the way the writers wanted him to pronounce flan. As Showtime approached, Bowie not only backed out of doing the skit, which had to be scrapped, he also changed the song he was scheduled to perform that night. He recalled, "I was scheduled to perform a single for my Earthling album called Telling Lies. Just before the band took the stage, I decided to take the piss out of Lauren a bit because I knew he wasn't happy with me." Bowie that night ended up performing the song Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, a song that Lorne Michaels found terrifying. Bowie added, "We got talking about this and that at a dinner one night, and Lauren's SNL hiatus in the early 80s came up. He told me how it was the darkest period of his life, and he described how much cocaine he did while listening to my Scary Monsters album. When the performance was done, Bowie ended up being escorted out of the studio and was banned for a short period of time." Bowie remarked he was upset that he wasn't allowed back into the green room to pick up his fruit basket that was given to him for the show. Bowie did return to SNL in 1999, a show that was hosted by comedian Jerry Seinfeld. In 1996, Rage Against the Machine released their sophomore album. Their self-titled debut record, which came out 4 years prior, went triple platinum and produced hits like Killing in the Name and Bomb Track. The band's follow-up, Evil Empire, was named after a term that former President Ronald Reagan used to describe the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It was another massive success, going triple platinum in the States and topping the Billboard album chart. As part of the promotion for the album, Rage Against the Machine was set to be the musical guest on April 13th, 1996. Now, I want to say whoever booked the show definitely knew what they were doing, and they wanted to incite an incident. Hosting the show that night was billionaire publisher and former Republican presidential candidate Steve Forbes. Forbes, to a lot of people, represented the establishment, an elite whose billions gave him sway over political leaders. Meanwhile, Rage built a career on their radical political views that challenged authority and the establishment. Well, you can probably guess what happened. Guitarist Tom Morello talked about the band's thinking that night, telling the LA Times, "We knew that he was going to be making a statement. It was going to be all about how charming to have a billionaire telling these jokes and promoting his flat tax. And we wanted to stand in sharp juxtaposition to that by making our own statement." The band was set to play 2 songs that night. The first was Bulls on Parade from their latest record, and the second was Bullet to the Head from their last album. 20 seconds before the band was set to start their first song, the members hung 2 American flags on their amps flipped upside down. Stagehands from the show tried to take the flags down before they went live, and after the band's first performance, they were waiting in the green room to go on stage for their next song. But the band was confronted by the show's producers about their protest and stopped from taking the stage. Angered, Rage's bassist Tim Comerford tore up a U.S. flag and barged into Forbes' dressing room and threw shards of the flag at the host that night and his entourage. Morello put out a statement following the appearance on SNL stating, "Saturday Night Live censored Rage, period, and they could not have sucked up to the billionaire more. The thing that's ironic is SNL is supposed to be the cutting-edge show, but they proved they're just bootlickers to their corporate masters when it comes down to it. They're cowards." An SNL official called the band's actions a publicity stunt, but producer Lorne Michaels tried to put on a braver face, saying in a statement, "We really enjoyed having Rage Against the Machine on our show." Morello later claimed that the cast members from SNL and their team expressed solidarity with our actions and a sense of shame that their show had censored the performance. Eclectic musician Frank Zappa first appeared on SNL in 1976 as a musical guest. Then 2 years later, he'd appear as a host and musical guest, and it didn't go well. Back during SNL's early days, it was pretty rare for the musical guest to also be the host. Looking uncomfortable during the beginning of the show, Zappa started things off by reminding the audience that he was reading off cue cards.
Thank you, and remember I'm reading this off these cards underneath this camera here.
Each episode of SNL involves a week of prepping, which includes brainstorming ideas for sketches, writing the sketches, and then rehearsing. The week leading up to live taping, Zappa didn't appear to get along with the cast of the show, so much so that some of the cast members even refused to appear on stage with the musician during the final segment of the show, known as the Good Night segment. Perhaps part of the reason that Zappa didn't get along with the cast was because during the 70s, drug use was pretty rampant amongst the SNL staff members, something Zappa disapproved of. After a poorly received dress rehearsal, Zappa adopted an attitude of indifference, and it was obvious to those watching at home. He went on to add, "SNL had written dialogue for me to say that I normally wouldn't say. They wouldn't let me write any of my own stuff." Fast forward to 1990, comedian and cast member Dana Carvey ended up imitating Frank Zappa on the show during an episode that comedian Andrew Dice Clay hosted. System of a Down appeared as a musical guest on May 7th, 2005, an episode that was hosted by Jackass actor Johnny Knoxville. That year saw the band release not one but 2 records, Mesmerize, which came out around this time, and Hypnotized, which was planned to come out in the fall. System of a Down was planning on performing their hit BYOB, which stands for Bring Your Own Bombs. The producers were of course nervous given that the Iraq War was still heavily dominating the news headlines. Couple this with the line, "Where the f*** are you?" which is repeated a number of times in the song. The band still planned on singing the line, but the show was going to be broadcast with a 5-second delay. That wasn't the line that caused the issues. Unexpectedly, guitarist Darian Malakian during the performance went up to the microphone and screamed, "F*** yeah." Spokespeople for Saturday Night Live told Variety that they didn't receive any complaints about the expletive, but they did slam the band and their management for the act. They also cut it out from any future broadcasts of the episode. While System of a Down was never invited back to Saturday Night Live, host Tina Fey in 2018 did do a rendition of their song Chop Suey in a skit. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and we'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.